Have you had your plus sign today? If not, no worries. On this episode of the Press Rewind Prince Lyrics podcast, we'll deliver the plus sign directly to your ears by talking about the song Positivity. And joining me on this episode is first-time guest Dr. Tara Betts. Welcome to the show, Tara.
Thanks for having me, Jason.
Glad to have you. Like I said, first-time guest, man. So this is your first time on the Press Rewind podcast. First-time listeners have had a chance to hear your voice. So I would appreciate it, and I'm sure the listeners would as well, if you wouldn't mind giving everybody just a little bit of your background and maybe also plugging in a little bit of your relationship to Lovesexy. And if you have any interesting stories to tell about Lovesexy or Positivity in particular, since that's the song of the day.
Oh, gosh. I think I've been a Prince fan at least since I was 12 years old. And which is hard when your parents are like, what's wrong with my child? She's 12 years old and she loves Prince. But that album, Lovesexy in particular, I remember that was one of those early albums that I bought before I had my first job. So, you had to save your allowance money to get it, right? Mm-hmm. And just thinking about how racy that cover was and like how Alphabet Street was all over MTV, and I kind of liked Alphabet Street, but it was something about just the overall vibe of that album that really stuck with me, and how you could, at the time, because I bought it on cassette, you could just fold out the liner notes, which I know a lot of kids now are like, what are liner notes? I've had to explain that once. And mm-hmm. To see everything printed out, it was almost like a book of poems to me, because by then I was reading poetry and I had these aspirations to be a poet. And there's so many things about Prince's lyrics that strike me like the attractive elements of poems, even though they are definitely song lyrics in the sense of they work well with instrumentation and how he phrases stuff. So for me, as somebody who ended up becoming a poet who's published books of poems, I think it's really been useful in terms of shaping some of my early poetic ideas. Because even when I sit down and write a poem now, I think about how does it sound, right? Does it sound right? Does it sound like something you would say? Like even if we watch, Under the Cherry Moon, just that whole scene. One of my favorite scenes is the scene where he's talking to the young woman and he asks her, if you want to buy a Sam Cooke album, where would you go? And it's like record stuff. So, if you know that joke and it really resonates with you, it's all about, does it sound right? Does it fit into what you really want to say?
Yeah.
Because that lexicon says everything about the person,
Yeah. And the liner notes in Lovesexy are very ornately written out, like in Prince's half cursive, half printed handwriting. And I've taken photos of it and I posted it online on my my Twitter feed because it's just a really interesting way. Like a lot of his liner notes are that way. Like he just has this beautiful handwriting that you see in books that have been published with his handwritten lyrics in it. So, right. I can see how you pull it out. I mean, on the cassette, they're a little smaller, and we had better eyes back in the day, so it wasn't so hard to read the liner notes on a cassette. Now, got to pull out the vinyl and read them because we're getting older. But I did the same thing. Did the same thing you did. So
yeah, I wish we had more of that because I know they had the Prince book that came out, and they leaned so heavily on the pictures because he was working on that memoir when he died. And I was just, man, I wish we really had the full story. So I kind of missed, because, other than he just had all these amazing little quirky adventures with other people that are coming out in other places, like Jimmy Fallon and Questlove and all these other folks. But it's like, it's going to be poetic and full of color, and it's going to be just like these weird, quirky little phrasings. And I kind of want that language. I miss it.
Yeah. And there's a lot of quirky language used on this album, I think. I mean, this is Positivity is the final song of the album, just to kind of cover some of the bases here. It's the final song on the Lovesexy track listing. Single track CDs be damned. It's the final track. I'll hear nothing else. It was recorded on December 11th, 1987, same day as I Know. So, he was thick in the recording sessions for Lovesexy in December of 87, and the song just kind of fits right in line with those recording sessions. And one little interesting piece, and I covered this when I recorded my episode for Cindy C with Rhonda Nicole for the Black Album, is that the rap that Kat does on Cindy C was originally intended to be on Positivity, believe it or not. But once Prince found out that that rap was plagiarized, then he had it removed. And I went into that whole story on the Cindy C episode with Rhonda, so listeners, check that out if you haven't already. But yeah, so we don't have a rap on this song like it was originally intended. That was scrapped. But it does close the album very nicely. I think it's gives the album closure, and it ends with the same kind of, I don't know, watery sounds that you get at the beginning of the album. So it kind of goes full circle. So if you're listening to it in a loop, the end of Positivity sounds just like the beginning of I Know. And so you can just kind of repeat the whole song cycle over again if you so desire, and it all flows very nicely. Mm-hmm. This was also a song recorded by Mavis Staples. So she did a cover of this song off her 1995 album, The Voice, on NPG Records. So that's just a kind of a neat little piece of trivia there. This was a song that was covered. Not a lot of Prince songs get covered, but sometimes they do, and sometimes they do by people who are Prince associates and people who Prince has worked with. So this is an example of that. We get a lot of female vocals on this song. You get Sheila E. and Bonnie Boyer. Their vocals are very heavy in the chorus and throughout the song, actually. So, I mean, there's a lot of interplay with vocals between Prince and Sheila and Bonnie throughout the song, which makes it a really interesting, I think an interesting aspect of the track that I like a lot is hearing their voices intermingled, especially in the chorus a lot. Do you like the way it sounds?
I like their vocals. I like that Ingrid Chavez makes an appearance on there, and I feel like in terms of her presence in the Prince pantheon, so to speak, of women, because there's been so many women creatives who were in there. Like, she's one of the ones that you don't hear about as much, even though she was the lead in Graffiti Bridge, and she's on the Graffiti Bridge album. She's here, and people really don't talk about that. It's like the most you hear about her is that Madonna kind of took her lyrics for Justify My Love, and that's all you hear. Even though Prince was like, why did you do that? But I think one of the things that really I find compelling about Positivity is how he alternates his phrasings, right? Like, some things are very slow and crawly, and then there's other things like the line you were talking about before, you gotta hold on to your soul. Like, it sounds like something you would hear in an old school soul song, and then there's like other parts where he speeds up a little bit, almost like he's rapping. And I was like, that range of what he does in one song is really interesting to me.
Yeah, he intermixes language, like modern slang, or at least, late 80s modern slang with some maybe older phrasing. The first couple of verses, and we'll be going through them very shortly, the first couple of verses are sung very similarly, but then the rest of the lyrics are completely different. They're longer verses, and you can call them verses, you can call them just sections of words or lyrics if you want. However you want to describe it, they're done very differently. Sometimes he's singing, sometimes he's speaking, sometimes he does both in the same verse. So it's an interesting song. It's a fairly long song. It's 7+ minutes long. And a lot of it is a lot of it is words and singing. It's not just like this. There's a little bit less than a minute of instrumental outro that I was referring to with the water sounds and like the ethereal synths going on in the background that mimicked how I Know begins at the front of the album. But that's less than a minute. So it's still 6+ minutes of core song that we have here at the end of the album. So it's one of those songs that goes on for a while and has a lot to say. So we probably should get to the lyrics, start on that journey. So the song opens up with yes, the word yes being echoed in the background.
Right.
And yes is a word that is repeated throughout this song. Yes is kind of like one of those words that is synonymous with Lovesexy. I think he used the word yes throughout like a lot of the visual aspects of this album, whether it was the music videos or a tour. Just the word yes being like a positive affirmation, something that you're, that you would say when you're approving of something. You're looking for that thing and you want to, and especially in this album when it's really kind of an allegory for religion and spirituality to embrace that, and you have to do that by saying yes to a lot of things that maybe scare you at first. So kind of looking at it from that perspective. But then the first verse is that a good man walking down that street with that money in his hand? Is that a good man? Why do you dog him? If that was your father, tell me, would you dog him then? Would you dog him? That's your first verse. So those are like the first lines you hear. And he asks, would you dog him twice? He says, is that a good man? No, he says, would you dog him 3 times? And is that a good man twice? So he's repeating a lot of these lines in this first verse. So there's not a lot of like unique words being said here. It's a repeat of many different lines for emphasis, I think. So like the line, why do you dog him? I mean, is that a reference to the man with money? Somebody who's supposed to be a comment that's maybe has deeper meaning, do you think, Tara?
Well, I mean, when I was younger, I just thought it was like this comment on materialism and superficiality, right? Like how I remember people using dog as the verb. Like they don't do it as much anymore, but just dog somebody out like you're not anybody special, just treat you like trash. But in the context of the larger album, it started to feel like this is almost kind of biblical, right? And I thought back to all the parables, in particular the one where the king goes back to his kingdom and he's dressed like a pauper. And because he's dressed like a pauper, everyone treats him like trash. And in that process, they discover later on that he was actually royalty. And then they're ashamed of how they acted. So when you think about how biblical and how much God comes up on this album, it makes a lot of sense that he's kind of condensing a parable down to something that could be in a song, that could be something people relate to in a more contemporary sense. So I thought a lot about that.
Yeah, and I wasn't sure if it also had maybe a comment on jealousy. So walking down that street with that money in his hand. So maybe people, and like, is that a good man? Would you dog him? Would you dog him? Asking like, would you dog somebody with money if you're jealous of them? And I'm not sure if that's, if I'm the only one that wonders that, but I just kind of came up with that idea of maybe it being a comment on jealousy too, potentially jealous of the next man that has something that you don't. Right. If that was your father, would you dog him? Is kind of an interesting line here as well, just because like, okay, you're dogging this stranger, that we perceive it to be a stranger. He never says the word stranger, but you kind of get the sense that it's just somebody that somebody sees with money in their hand. But right. If that was somebody you knew, somebody that was close to you, would you have the same feeling towards them? Would you take the same approach in talking to them? Would you dog them? Would you tease them? Would you give them a hard time? And if that was your father?
Yeah. And then if you had that kind of intimacy with them, does that make them somehow different from another human being? Right.
Yeah. Good point. A lot of questions in this first verse that don't really get answered, but it does make you think a little bit. Like, what is he trying to say with these lines?
And do you have integrity? Like, I think he's questioning people's integrity throughout this song. Like, even when you go into the next verse, I think he's kind of doing that a little bit. Like, what are your values?
Yeah, is that a good man? Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Asking that question, you have to look at somebody, whether they have money or not. In this case, that person has money, but you still have to ask, is that a good man? Just because they have money don't make him a good person.
Right.
How did they get that money? And that's, like you said, that's what he asks in the second verse, but we'll get there in a minute. They should be telling us a story. A lot of Prince songs tell a story in the context of the lyrics, and you can't just look at each verse in a vacuum. So, yeah. So then the chorus is positivity. Then you hear the background, a woman, I don't know who, maybe Sheila, maybe Bonnie, maybe both, saying yes. Have you had your plus sign today? Positivity. Yes. Do we mark you present or do we mark you late? All right, so the only thing I'm going to say about this verse or this chorus up front is the women's vocals are stronger in the mix than Prince's, in my opinion. Like, I hear Prince, but I mostly hear Sheila and Bonnie. How about you, Tara?
I definitely think he punched them up in the choruses, but I think he really knew as an artist that the women really complimented his style and did things that he just couldn't do as a musician. You know, it's like he was going to come with a certain type of masculine energy in the work, but also just surrounded himself with all these amazing, talented people, you know, sometimes very beautiful, talented people. And I'm sure that garnered him a certain level of attention that other male artists necessarily didn't get, right? Mm-hmm. So I think part of it was part marketing on his part, but then also I think just like there's not another Sheila E., and I don't think we'll ever have one. There's not another Bonnie Boyer, you know. I mean, I think Bonnie might be slightly comparable to Rosie Gaines, who we know Prince worked with on New Power Generation, but, you know, God bless her, rest in peace. Bonnie Boyer was the only Bonnie Boyer, you know, and I think in doing so, he really created something where not only these women got a chance to shine, but sometimes they kind of like, you know, made the song something more than what he could have made it. Like I keep thinking of, what's the album that recently came out on Tidal where it's like him doing the demos? Do you know the one?
Oh, original. Are you talking about originals?
I think that's what it's called. Yeah.
Yeah.
But some of the demos were songs that he recorded for women, like I think Nasty Girl. And I had never heard his version of Nasty Girl. And I'm like, oh gosh, I really love that Vanity did this song with Vanity 6.
Sex Shooter too, with Apollonia 6, his version of Sex Shooter. Manic Monday was intended for women. First it was intended for Apollonia, and then it was given, of course, to Bangle. So yeah, he's got a lot of examples like that.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah, very, very cool. And sometimes you're right. I mean, as good as Prince's versions of some of these songs were, and I'm not going to cite examples because I don't want to spark any controversy, but I think that there are times when the women that he gave those songs to served the song better than he could have.
Yeah, and there's moments where he said that himself about certain songs. Like, I think I just gave this person to them because I liked it better in their voice, you know? Yeah. And if you're prolific like that, that's not a challenging thing to do. You're like, you know, that's like, you give it to somebody else because, you know, they can perform it in a way that sounds unlike how you sound.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like that's confidence in your abilities, confidence in your, you know, your craft, that you can create a song and knowing that giving it away is probably the best thing that you could do for that song.
Right. And even as a writer, you're like, if you're a writer, you can be that flexible. Like everything you write doesn't just sound like you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's pretty impressive. I
Yeah.
think we'd have to both agree on that one.
Yeah.
In the chorus, the line that, I mean, there's a couple lines. Of course, there's just him saying positivity with the yes in the background, but the two lines that are, I think, memorable and worth discussing a little bit at least is the line, have you had your plus sign today? And do we mark you present or do we mark you late? So the have you had your plus sign today is one of those lines that kind of transcends the song. Like you hear people say that, people at least in the Prince world. I mean, I don't know if it's really expanded outside of those of us in the Prince world that listen to his music all the time and talk about his music and talk about the man himself on social media and amongst other friends. But it is a line, you say that and people know exactly what you're talking about if they're in the Prince world. It's just one of those lines. It's catchy, it's memorable, and it's just a really kind of cool way of saying, have you embraced positivity in your life? Have you tried to push away negativity, negative thoughts? Have you had your plus sign? Like, have you thought about the ways that you can be a positive person, not just in your own life, but be exhibit positivity throughout everything you do to maybe brighten up somebody else's day or make somebody else feel good. That's a little bit what I get from that. And to be honest with you, I had to do a little bit of digging because it just felt like I'd heard something like that before, maybe not in those exact words, but I thought I'd heard something like that before. Maybe it was like a riff on that, or, he changed a word or two. Do you know what I'm kind of referring to? Is there like an ad campaign that was used, Tara, that you remember?
I don't remember an ad campaign at the time, but I remember my first initial impressions of it is just, it seemed like a very, like, almost kind of like a check-in question, like the type of questions we ask each other now in this time of self-care, where everybody talks about self-care, except you're not saying plus sign. Usually you're telling people, did you drink water today? Did you take a shower today? Like, it's almost like it felt essential like that before there was a self-care movement and before everybody was talking about positive thinking in the way they talk about it now. And yet it's still not like, we've gotten so far into that conversation as a culture that now we're talking about toxic positivity and what does it look like when you find balance, right? So I think he might have been struggling with that concept when he was working on this album in the 80s. It's like we're just now kind of catching up to that as a larger general public of talking about, okay, you can have moments where you're negative, you can have moments where you're positive, but are you kind of finding equilibrium where, there's going to be ups and downs? Like, even when he gets to the line about the W's, I thought a lot about that.
Yeah. Now, good insight. But I did do a little bit of digging because it sounded to me like maybe a breakfast cereal jingle that I'd heard, but I couldn't find anything to confirm that. So what I ended up doing is I went into Google, I just typed in "have you had your," and just let it autofill to see what came up.
Okay.
And the one thing that came up that seemed like more potential realistic influence would have been an 80s ad campaign for shower to shower body powder. Have you ever heard of it? Yeah.
Yes, I have.
So the jingle back then was, "Have you had your sprinkle today?" And I watched a couple of videos on YouTube, because you can find just about any video on YouTube nowadays. And the jingle goes, "Have you had your sprinkle today?"
Yeah.
And that was in the 80s. And so it's possible. I'm not going to say Prince heard that. I was like, yeah, I'm going to, repurpose that and use plus sign. But maybe he did. I don't know.
I don't know.
The timing's right.
But I do think I tend to think my interpretation might be more what it is. Because it's just so, it's kind of quirky. I mean, I'm sure we find inspiration everywhere in unexpected places. I tell my writing students that all the time. Like, you may see something weird and you just reinterpret it a little bit off kilter to make it do something you want it to do.
Mhm.
and I definitely would believe Prince would do that.
Sure, totally. Yeah. Yeah. So it's just an interesting thing. I had to bring it up because I tend to do that in episodes where I think I hear something and I thought I was just my brain was playing tricks on me. And I was imagining knowing of an ad campaign that kind of sounded like this. And I'm sure that I'd heard that in the 80s when I was a kid and, shoved it in the back of my brain because why would I ever need to commit that to memory? But some of those, I mean, ad jingles are ad jingles for a reason. They work.
Yeah,
They
they
get stuck in your head and you never forget them. Doesn't matter if it's been 30 plus years since I've heard that. I'm sure I still had it in my head.
Yeah. I didn't remember it till you said it. I was like,
Exactly. Like, thank
yeah.
gosh for Google and YouTube, man. I would have been racking my brain on that one for potentially forever.
It's funny that have you had your plus sign today sticks with you because I feel like the second question stuck with me more as a younger listener.
Yeah,
You
expand on that if you don't mind.
Just that whole idea of are you present or are you late? Like we know it's like a school question, the way it's phrased,
Hmm.
but I always thought about, like, well, thankfully now woke is going out as a phrase. It's like I kind of pictured it being almost like this thing, like, are you aware? Are you here? Are you ready? As opposed to present. And then if you're late, it's like you missed the boat.
Hmm.
Like you don't even know what we're talking about. you know?
Yeah.
So to hear that in that question, it doesn't say that directly, but it felt very implied to me as a
Hmm.
listener then and now to think about, yeah, because the whole album is kind of like coming to consciousness about making certain types of decisions. And I'm like, that makes so much more sense to me now why I thought that
Yeah.
initially. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, very good. I agree with you on that one for sure. A
Hmm.
lot of the Lovesexy lyrics, and I don't have any examples to cite, but anybody can go back through and find them where Prince is kind of like encouraging those that he's singing to and talking about to make a decision to find God and do it soon. I mean, he said before, like, we're running out of time, and he uses the running out of time concept in previous songs. Verse 2 is kind of similar to verse 1. It goes, "Is that all your gold? Where did it come from? What did you have to do? Can you sleep nights? Do you dream straight up, or do you dream in W's?" Some more questions he's kind of posing out there, hypothetical questions that
Right.
he's not necessarily looking for answers for, but it's asking a lot of the same stuff. So instead of a man with walking down the street with money, now he's talking about gold and like, is that your gold? How
Hmm.
did you get it? Basically, like, again, asking the same questions. Like he said, is that a good man in the first verse? And he's kind of implying the same thing with these questions. Where did it come from? What did you have to do? Can you sleep nights? So did you did you earn that gold in this case, or that money, in a way that, in an honest way, was it morally earned? Did you have to break any laws to do it? How do you
Right.
feel about yourself now that you have this possession, now that you have this gold? Can you
Hmm.
sleep at night knowing how you had to earn it? And if
Right.
the answer is yes, then maybe you did the right thing and you embraced positivity. But if you didn't, and that's where that last line: do you dream straight up, or do you dream in W's?
Hmm.
Um, so that last line's interesting. I have a couple thoughts on it, but I'm going to let you tackle it first if you don't mind.
Yeah. I really like that he ends on that because, again, it kind of links back to what I was thinking about with that previous stanza. Like, do you dream straight up or in W's? Just that idea of something jagged, but not saying it's like a lifeline pulsing up and down or it's ebbs and flows. He says straight up W's. And I guess for me, it's like, as somebody who grew up in the Midwest, in a town that survived on factories, I grew up in Kankakee, Illinois, and I grew up above my grandparents' tavern. So in that tavern, I saw people who were like, either they worked factory jobs and they had these jobs that kind of grind you down and you got to find a way to kind of just keep going, which is another kind of ebb and flow. But then also there were people who did get their money doing grimy things that I saw as a kid, and they were always kind to me as the kid, and they might have been really cool with my dad. But to think about that, right? Like, what did you do to get money to keep you inside? And then once you're inside, can you even sleep? So I thought a lot about those questions as a young person listening to this album, but I also think about, do you feel like the money is more important than your beliefs? Do you think the money is more important than, what you believe you should stand for? And I feel like that's what this song is really grappling with. Like, is there something you value more than the superficial things in life, right? So when you dream, like he goes, is that, like, I almost feel like, is that all your goal? Like he says it almost like that. Like, is that the only gold you have? Like there's that implication of that.
Mm-hmm.
Like there is types of gold. So,
yeah.
If you're dreaming straight up or in W's, straight seems more like a path of ascendancy where there's other things that you can dream about. And that's really exciting to me as an idea, to think you can have all sorts of dreams. Or even if you look at stuff like Graffiti Bridge, which came after this, or, where it's like he kind of creates this made up village. Graffiti Bridge is all about a made up village. And I was like, it's kind of fantastical when you think, and I feel like this whole album does that. Like, probably, and I hate to say this, since we're talking about positivity, Anastasia is probably my favorite song from Lovesexy, because it's like, to me, it strikes me as so dreamy. As a continuum, the whole album feels dreamy, but it's like you can tell positivity is like the end of the dream by the time you get to the end of the song.
Yeah. I just like that line because I like the multiple meanings that you can apply to it.
Mm-hmm.
So, the term straight up, at least how I've always interpreted it, like, the song Paula Abdul sang, straight up, now tell me, do you really want to love me forever?
Yeah,
so that was basically like, for real, like, tell me truthfully. Like, is this for real? Are you trustworthy? Straight up, tell me. Like, no bullshitting. And so I think of it that way, and also straight up, as you mentioned, pointing up, ascending. So, but then what's a W? W is anything but, a straight line. It's all over the place. It's up and down. It's wavy. It doesn't go in one direction. It goes in multiple directions. So, but then W also can mean, especially if we're talking about money, gold, money, I think of it as wealth. W for wealth. It could be, do you dream about wealth? Do you dream about wins? Meaning like, to get over, or anything that, like, are you dreaming about ascending, and not just maybe, from a spiritual standpoint, but just elevating your place in life, elevating your platform, elevating others around you? Or are you just dreaming about wins and losses, how to make more money, that kind of thing? So I just like that line because I think that it has a lot of different interpretations that you can apply to it. And it's just cool when Prince can do that.
Right. And he starts leaning more on like W questions, like who, when, and where.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Absolutely. Yeah. So those first two verses are kind of sung similarly. They have asked some of the similar questions in a different way, seem to be conveying a very similar thing. We get another chorus after the second verse. Positivity, have you had your plus sign today? Positivity, yes. Do we mark you present or do we mark you late? Probably nothing more than we need to talk about that chorus again, since we already kind of went through it. We do get a little bit of a change here where we have the na, 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 and then you hear somebody say so slow. Positivity, and you get more na, 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 so slow. I'm not sure what the so slow has to do with the overarching themes of the song. I don't even know if we need to talk about it unless you have some thoughts on it, Tara.
Well, I kind of like it because it's almost like it struck me like that kind of slow process of coming to consciousness about something, right? And again, it's a wonderful opportunity to showcase Sheila E. and Bonnie Boyer singing together because they're like, na, 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 so slow.
Mhm.
So it's like just to kind of like give you some variety in terms of where it's going sonically before you just drop into another verse.
Yeah.
So, it's just another really wonderful layer of sound. But since you're talking about consciousness, it's like, what's one quality you can describe to get to another level of how you see and think about the world? And it is slow, it's painful.
Hmm.
So it made me
Yeah.
that for sure.
Yeah. I'm with you on that. I figured there had to be some sort of reason why they would say so slow in this song, besides it just sounding cool. So I was
That was
open to just about any interpretation you had to offer on that one. Completely open on that. Okay, so the third verse is where Prince does his thing, where he switches up his vocals, he switches up how the verse is sung, and he does the same here in Positivity. No surprises. He's sort of rapping now a little bit.
Mhm.
He still's asking some questions, but it's not straight up like same questions asked multiple times about money or wealth. So now he's asking more philosophical questions. And the lines go in the third verse. Can a boy who drops out at school, 13 years of age, answer to life and death when it slaps him in the face? Who's to blame when he's got no place to go and all he's got is the sense to know that a life of crime will help him beat you in the race? Help him beat you in the race. Positivity. So here we go a little bit in a different direction, I think. He's now talking, instead of talking about access to wealth or how did one retrieve the wealth that they possess, and kind of painting a picture there. He's painting a different picture. Now he's painting a picture of poverty and painting a picture of, children who are dropping out of school and don't have a great home life, don't have a support system around them. 13 years of age is really young. I have a 13-year-old daughter, so I can't imagine, my 13-year-old having to make these really tough life decisions, like, how am I going to eat my next meal? Where am I going to sleep tonight? These are imagery. This is kind of the imagery we're supposed to be getting from this verse. Would you agree with that, Tara? Do you have a different take on it?
I kind of feel like it does too, what you're describing. But it's also like, I like that he does that, not just in this song, he does it in Sign of the Times too, where it's that similar kind of inversion, where you have in France, a man dies of a big disease with a little name, and then he says at a home for 17-year-old boys, their idea of fun. Like, so it starts with an adult, then it goes to a younger person. And I think he knows I can talk about a social issue or an idea or a core belief that human beings have. And then I can move into a child because, what's going to make you feel more empathy as a listener or a reader? It's going to be that idea of a child suffering. And I think it's a really smart rhetorical move, but it's also one of those things. It's like, considering where we are in the world, we see it more. We're seeing it more than we should. And I don't think a lot of lyricists look at it that way. I think we kind of romanticize youth a little bit. And Prince in this song and in other songs, I think, is like, look, being young can be hard too. And what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
he's just putting it out there. Like this boy who drops out of school at age 13 has no place to go. So you know what? Hey, life of crime is going to help him beat you in the race, meaning like it's going to help him achieve, whatever that is. And if that achieving means to take what's yours and turn it into his, that's part of the race in his mind. I mean, his choices are limited, is what I think Prince is trying to say. All he's got is the sense to know that a life of crime will help him beat you in the race. Because he's dropped out of school, he doesn't have any other real legitimate options to live, right? I mean, this is really what it boils down to, is life and death, as he says, the answers to life and death. And life is where the boy is going to choose, and however he can live is what he's going to do, and what it's going to take to live is what he's going to do.
Especially if he doesn't want to be homeless or hungry,
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And you're right, it does force the listener to just to think about, their lives as children, or the children that they know, or children that they have, and offer that empathy and think of it in a way that, it makes them pause a little bit about maybe some of the judgment that, or at least I think it's intended to maybe push pause on some of that judgment that we tend to do for criminals, especially criminals that are adults. We're all like, oh, you should be old enough to know better. People say that all the time. You should be old enough to know better. But we don't know they weren't always adults, right? So who knows what their life was like when they were kids, and they might have been making these same decisions as children, and they've had no alternative since then. So why would we expect them to have a different frame of mind as an adult when they've been dealing with life this way for potentially decades? So positivity, he ends that verse with positivity. And I guess, with him punctuating this, it just kind of begs the question, what is he trying to say with this? Like, he's offered a few different scenarios about wealth management and also life and death situations, poverty is at stake, and then just leading off with positivity, or ending it, I should say, with positivity. So is he trying to say he's hoping that people turn to positivity? Is he asking us to have a positive outlook towards these people that maybe we might have had a negative outlook towards? I don't know. I think it's maybe open for interpretation. What do you think?
I think it can be a little bit. I mean, one, that there's still hope for a young person, even if they make a decision that is questionable, or we know is like maybe not morally right, but if they had guidance, they could be something else. But I always think about what I ended up eventually thinking as a teacher. It's like, as a teacher, do I help create young people who are going to be more likely to help someone in need, or knock somebody over and take their purse? I may not be a parent, but I think that's a question we should all be asking as adults. Are we creating people who will be better people in general, and better people maybe than we were?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I think he's kind of, even when he gets into the next stanza, it's like he's encouraging that next generation of young people. And that's what your job should be as an adult. It's like, it's not your child, but what can you do to contribute to those children who will be here probably longer than we will?
Yeah, I like that. So we get another couple of choruses, the repeating of the positivity, had your plus sign, do we mark it present, do we mark it late? We get some more of the na, so slow. I don't think there's anything more to talk about there. Touched on that already. So we got a couple more verses here, basically. I call them verses, whatever they're called to you. Stanzas, grouping of lines. So here he starts off this fourth verse, again, kind of rapping or just speaking the lines like he did in the third verse. Wave your hands for positivity, y'all, all the boys and all the girls. You are the new kings of the world. Shall the court sing together? And then he starts singing. In every man's life there will be a hang-up, a whirlwind designed to slow you down. It cuts like a knife and tries to get in you, the spooky electric sound. Give up if you want to, and all is lost. Spooky electric will be your boss. Then he goes right into the next grouping of lines, but I'm going to pause there. Give us a chance to talk about these lines. All right, so these seem to be like surface level solutions, which I know in the scope of a 5 to 7 minute song, what real solutions can Prince offer?
Mm-hmm.
But they do feel a little like surface level, like wave your hands for positivity. It's like, okay, all right, easier said than done sometimes, but sure, just trying to put that vibe out there, and that's what the song's supposed to be, putting a vibe out there, putting a vibe out in the world of positive thinking, positive way of life, and it kind of speaks to your line or your discussion about thinking of still holding out hope. You're the new kings of the world, all the boys and all the girls. You're the new kings of the world. That's a line I think intended to lift up spirits.
Yeah.
Think of yourself as the next leaders. Think of yourself as the next rulers, and whatever capacity that means to you. Even if things maybe look dour now, give up if you want to. All is lost. Don't give up. That's what he's saying. I think give up if you want to. All will be lost if you do. And Spooky Electric, as we've described in other episodes on this album, is the kind of the proxy for the devil or Satan, stands in there. He doesn't use those words very often, but in this album, Spooky Electric is that negative feeling, negative aspect, and also just straight up Satan or the devil.
Mm-hmm.
So this fourth verse just trying to bring, I think it feels like it's bringing it all together, like the concepts of the first three verses, trying to put it all together in a package that helps us as the listener understand a bit more what he's trying to say in this song. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts about this fourth verse, Tara?
Well, I definitely think he knows not only is he coming to the end of the song, but this is the end of the album. So it feels like it's almost like this is the summation of what he wants you to get out of the whole album. Kind of like if you hear old black folk tales, there's like a phrasing that they let you know the story is in, like step on a pin, this is the end. Or they'll say some kind of phrasing like that. So it almost hits me tonally like that, especially when you get to the give up if you want to, all is lost, Spooky Electric will be your boss. But I also think a lot about when I went back to that affirmative part that's at the beginning of the verse where he says, you are the new kings of the world. Because that's how he says it on the album, where there's that pause between new and kings. And it's like he's almost shouting it with Sheila and Bonnie, I believe, right? Because It's not him, it's multiple voices. But I kept thinking of, and we all know Prince has influenced so many other artists across genres. Like, I kept thinking of Nas's song, I Know I Can, and him affirming kids in that song and calling them royalty. And again, because this was 1988, that's something a lot of Black folks did. When you think about that culture of the 90s and people growing up where they were like, hey, king, hey, queen, like it struck me as, yeah, that makes sense.
Well, I mean, there were rappers that had names like that. Queen Latifah, King T, King Sun. So,
right.
It just falls right in line with that. And they all came out at the same time, late 80s. They all came up in the rap world at the same time. So fits right in with that. So I like that. And, the line, in every man's life, there will be a hang up. To me, it reminds me a little bit of the song Forever in My Life off Sign of the Times. There comes a time in every man's life he gets tired of fooling around. So he's a little bit of a callback there. But here, of course, he's talking about to be a hang up, a whirlwind designed to slow you down. He's just talking about, again, everybody runs into adversity, negativity in their life. It's really how you handle it. It's how you address it and how you deal with the aftermath of that. Is kind of more telling of your character and who you are as a person than, did you pick yourself up or did you give up? And that's what he's basically asking here, I think. Any other comments on this fourth verse before we move on?
For Spooky Electric, I love the word whirlwind. It's one of my favorite words. Again, it goes back to how he just does these W words that are really quirky and excellent in this song. But I do think it's a summation verse. I think it's interesting that he came up with Spooky Electric as kind of the metaphor for the devil. Because it makes me think of that sound you hear in horror movies or something where it's like, woo, and you're just like, oh, I would have never thought of that.
Yeah.
like have almost that synesthesia quality for an entity, And again, I think that lends to kind of like that fantastical element that's always in Prince's work, where he just makes up these quirky things with color and light and sensory detail.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm with you on that. It's pretty cool. I think whether you like it or dislike it, you can't deny it's creative.
Yeah.
We'll give him that for sure. All right. So the final verse of lyrics: call People Magazine, Rolling Stone, call your next of kin because your ass is gone. He's got a 57 mag with the price tag still on the side. Cousin, when Spooky say dead, you better say died. Or you can fly high, right by Spooky and all that he crawls for. Spooky and all that he crawls for. Don't kiss the beast. We need love and honesty, peace and harmony, positivity. Then it repeats that. Love and honesty, peace and harmony. And now you start hearing, I take it to be mostly Bonnie, but Sheila might be in there as well. I said, hold on to your soul. You got a long way to go. Hold on to your soul. You got a long way to go. And then you hear Prince saying, don't kiss the beast. Be superior at least. Hold on to your soul. You got a long way to go. And that's how the song ends. Okay, so this is a bit more of that summation verse, I think, just like expanding on that a little bit. I like to call the shout outs to People Magazine and Rolling Stone just two magazines. He could have picked just about anything, but those are entertainment magazines, so it makes sense that Prince would call out entertainment magazines.
And then Stone is like a slant rhyme with Gone.
Brings up Spooky again here a couple times. Spooky say dead, you better say died.
Yeah.
Right, fly right by Spooky and all that he crawls for. And using the word crawls here kind of also gives off a little bit of that creepy-crawly horror movie vibe. Somebody who's just like crawling on the ground, trying to get at you. He just gives off vibes of just something to avoid, I guess is the best way to describe it.
And again, I mean, I feel like, yeah, you can read the verses, but it's like, it's like so much of when you think about in the African-American tradition of signifying, right? Like, because he'll be like, he says, call your next of kin because your ass is gone. He got a 57 mag with the price tag still on the side. Cousin, when Spooky say dead, you better say died. Like, he's like there's that little bit of attitude in it that you like, I'm going to warn you because it's about to come. It's going to hit the fan if you don't. So I feel like it's a little bit of that kind of coinage that he's going for. And I love that Prince will do that, like that he'll just mess with people in that kind of signifying way, where it's like the way you would say it to your family as opposed to the way you say it to people who you're going to talk to at a job interview, per se.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think the kiss the beast part is very obvious, but the part that follows where he talks about love, honesty, peace, and harmony, it really reminds me of, and it was still on the air and Don Cornelius still did it, how he would close out Soul Train. Because he would say, he's like, and as always, love, peace, so he'd do love, then he'd throw up the peace sign, he'd go down, come up with the fist and say soul. And that was how they ended out the show. And then they would do the theme song and it would kind of play out. And I feel like it gives you a similar kind of vibe. Like he's telling you, this is where we're going. So to hear, hold on to your soul, you got a long way to go. So it almost kind of takes me back to that too from childhood. And Don Cornelius, like, giving you the final message before you go out into the world and face a new week. Because it was every Saturday you watch Don Cornelius, So
yeah, that's what this is. This is the final message from Prince on Lovesexy. So, he's kind of doing a very similar thing here, I think. Spot on with that. Hold on to your soul. You've got a long way to go. And then he also says, we got a long way to go. Or they say, we got a long way to go. So, it's not just you, we all have a long way to go. And it's like just thinking of it from a perspective, we're all in this together. Like we as a human race, we as a community, however you want to think about it, we've got a long way to go. Meaning maybe, our lives we still got a long life ahead of us. Or we still have a long way to go to get to a place where we feel like our souls are being saved.
Right.
I think it could maybe be interpreted both ways, potentially.
Right.
You got a lot of work to do. You got to put in the work, as he said, later on in his career.
Yeah. And not even just that, but I love how this song, if you really look at the trajectory of Prince, like I always think about, in particular, Purple Rain and Graffiti Bridge, which was supposed to be the sequel to Purple Rain, how the kid is this character who's always the underdog. And he's always trying to stand up for something that's right. He's a little flawed, but, like you think about him when he slaps Abalone in Purple Rain, and I'm like, dude, I got problems with that. But still, it's like, you still want the kid to win in Purple Rain. You still want him to help save the community and help Melody Cool and George Clinton in Graffiti Bridge, and that music is going to win and the good side is going to win. And I think that's what positivity is for him. That's what, you're fighting the devil, you're fighting the bad guy. Yeah. So it's like a very classic kind of theme throughout this album and in the work that follows it, I think.
Yeah, a lot of good versus evil kind of imagery in the song and the album. Don't kiss the beast, be superior at least. Like, be above that, be better than that.
Right.
Don't stoop. I mean, literally stoop, because he's talking about Spooky's crawling, so you get the impression Spooky's on the floor. At least, I think that's kind of imagery you're supposed to get when somebody says he's crawling towards you. You have to get down on your hands and knees to get to his level. And of course, being down on your hands and knees or getting down on the floor can have a lot of connotations of just going down to the level of your opponent, down in the dirt, meaning also like you think of heaven up in the sky, and you think of hell down underneath the ground, and just it gives you all of that. Like, it gives you all of that imagery, like to get down into the dirt, get dirty, or however you want to interpret that. I think it all works for me too. Hold on to your soul. That's a line I really enjoy in this song. I think it's a great line and a great way to go out on this song. I think. Absolutely. Do you have any final thoughts on the song, Tara, that you wanted to touch on that we haven't already talked about?
I'm really grateful that you gave me the chance to talk about this album, because I feel like I listened to this album a lot solo, and Lovesexy in general is definitely one of those albums that I call it a bathtub album for me, which means I can sit in the tub and either I have a little stand, that you can, like, they make these little things that's got like an expandable leg on it, so you can put it over the lip of the tub, and you can put a wine glass in it, you can put a book on it. So it's like either I can put a little notebook there and write while I'm in there listening to the album and drink a glass of wine, or I get these wax pencils so I can write on the tile in the tub, and I write notes for poems. So I've done that to this album because it was just, the lyrics are just so weird and the sounds are so weird that it makes my mind float. Usually I write to music that doesn't have words, but Prince, I think because he is so much a part of my poetic imagination in a lot of ways from childhood on, because I started writing poems around 12 or 13, to the point where I remember as a kid using the number 4, the capital U for you in some of my early poems. And now I'm like, oh, that's what that was. I didn't even really think, he was that absorbed into me wanting to be a writer. But yeah, he's definitely a part of my narrative impulse. And this album was one of the ones that really touched me. So thank you for giving me the chance to talk about it with you.
You're welcome. I'm thrilled to have you on. Honestly, anytime I can get a new guest, it's a pleasure for me. So thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for agreeing to be on this episode. And I want to give you a chance now to talk a little bit more about your published works. Anything you wanted to share with the listeners about where they can find your poems?
Sure. I actually have 3 books. The third book will be out at the end of June of 2022. That book is Refuse to Disappear. My earlier books are Break the Habit and another book called Arc and Hue. But Refuse to Disappear has a couple of Prince poems in it. So I'm really excited to celebrate one of my early influences in the book and, celebrate also too some, like Prince did, a lot of women of color who are amazing and talented artists in their own right.
So thank you very much, Tara, for being on. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
And you can find the show on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. Hit me up there if you have any comments on this episode or really any episode that I've done thus far. Love to hear from you. PressRewind.net is the website where you can access the episodes as well. Until next time, thank you very much and goodbye.